Welcome to the Tällberg Foundation's New Thinking for a New World podcast. In this episode, Rosario Diaz Garavito, founder of the Millennials Movement, Baiqu Gonkar, founder of Art Represents, and David Ross, an environmental entrepreneur in waste energy, share their views on the millennial future of the post-COVID world with Alan Stoga, the chairman of the Tällberg Foundation.
We're going to talk today about life after the coronavirus. You all have the advantage that most of your life is ahead of you. So let's just start with that very simple perspective. David, as you think about life after coronavirus and the world that is coming at us, are you optimistic or pessimistic?
I'm always an optimist. So I believe in the power of forward thinking and not just forward thinking, but doing. I do believe, though, that the current administration, the U.S. administration, for that matter, may not have the wherewithal to get through this initial stage afterwards. But I do believe as a society, as the world gets past COVID, there's a lot of interesting things that are going to happen. And I also believe that people are going to, and individuals and companies are going to start driving and moving the needle in the right direction afterwards.
Rosario, you are a founder of the Millennials Movement, which means by definition, you're thinking about how millennials can contribute, maybe force positive change. Is that how you look at the world, that it's the potential for positive change is there?
I feel optimistic. I guess it's part of the generation view, towards the world. Definitely when the Millennials Movement started, that was the main thing, how this generation is able to take action to be able to change the things, to make things happen, And in that way, I feel very optimistic in the way that I seen many young people and other people, for instance, not that young, taking action or doing the things that for me was surprising. And in the way that I never thought the response was going to be that good, So in that way, I'm optimistic, but also I guess I'm worried as well, because I see this as an opportunity, as was mentioned before. But the thing is that I'm worried about what is the next dynamic, because our world was living in a one dynamic, and COVID-19 was a disruptive event, and then decisions are going to be taken, and I'm worried about, for instance, more nationalist feelings in different countries. In the case of my country, for instance, that's one of the feelings that is going to show, because we realize our industry was not ready to respond to this. We didn't have the technology. Our agricultural sector was very weak. And then is the response going to be, okay, let's try to build up in our all together, or let's try to close our minds and focus on our country and focus only on our people to do things better and be able to respond in the future? I don't know how that transition is going to go. And I know some countries, or this situation is also an opportunity for people who, for instance, or leaders that, for instance, are not willing to move their interests, or move some hate speech or other bad sentiments within people. So that's something that worries me a lot in the near and in the future. Mm-hmm.
Baiqu, you bring the filter and the thinking of the art world to these issues. Are you optimistic or pessimistic that this enormous reset that's coming as a result of the coronavirus is going to be a good thing or a bad thing?
I think personally I'm an optimist by nature, but I think I'm a realist through life experiences. And I think working with artists, I think one thing that you realize is that creative people are eternally optimistic, although they do see the world for what it is. And I think looking back, you see that throughout human history, when there are huge moments of disruption and trauma, you get a period of renaissance and you get a period of massive creativity. And I think perhaps a moment that yanks us out of the daily rhythm enables us to have a more philosophical approach to the issues that surround us. And I think it allows us to tap into a sort of suffering that makes us relate to others in a way that we perhaps cannot when we're living in our daily grind. In that way, I am optimistic. However, I'm cautious about, sort of expectations of a paradigm shift, because I think, as Rosario said, at the moment there is a lot of fear, and there's a tendency, I think, when we feel threatened, to want to go inward into our tribe, into people that we identify with, that we relate with. And you can see national policies, you can see public rhetoric that is bending towards the sense of isolation and this sense of disengagement from the other, which I think is wrong. I think that could lead us down a dangerous road. I think from a climate perspective, it's an interesting time because, we talk about living in this incredibly globalized world, and now we've had this massive interruption where that sense of globalization has impacted us all, I think, more than it would have, say, 50 years ago or a century ago. At the same time, is making us realize that perhaps things need to be more localized, but knowledge and, I think, intellectual property and, medical findings, political discussions has to happen on a more international scale in order for us to come out of this together. So I feel like we're at the cusp of an interesting time. And I think action and pivoting us towards the right direction is probably the key thing right now.
Let's talk a bit about that tension between the global and the local. The problems are global. Action is always local, almost by definition. Do you think there'll be more opportunities out of this crisis to accelerate the kind of very practical stuff you're trying to do to make a contribution to change climate?
I think pre-COVID, there was a B2B model. I mean, essentially, you went to the store to buy goods and services. You went to the grocery store. You went out and about and had to go, to shopping malls and stores alike. What's happening is in the middle of COVID, is what we're moving into right now is really to a quintessential B2C model, in which serving those that, because obviously with shelter in place, quarantine, and not knowing when that actually is going to end, we're finding local opportunities where, like, for instance, in my neighborhood, where we're sourcing local eggs, we're sourcing local beer, or local people. We're moving almost into an 1800s time where you have now technology as well. And I think that's a very interesting paradigm shift, and it's happened within a two-month period. Those that right now will innovate and bring the services to the consumer at their residence is going to have those are the companies that are going to change. And as you're seeing right now, big companies, the meatpacking industries, the big department stores filing for bankruptcy or having major issues. I mean, it's affecting our distribution lines, our logistics lines. So yeah. So what, as far as changing that, yeah, I think having these multinational conglomerations of a few set of companies, I think it's going to be disbanded over time. And I think we're going to be moving into where staying local, keeping it local, buying local, especially like right now when you're in this, supporting local restaurants, supporting those people that are here is really a new trend that I'm watching and I'm really liking, because I think it has a lot of not only just economic benefits, but I think it also has some sustainable and environmental benefits as well.
The time when globalization seems to be coming apart at the seams. Rosario, you're, if the airlines ever allow you, headed back to Peru. Can you imagine a Peru that develops better in a world that isn't as globalized as the one we all thought we were going to live in? Or is this a potential tragedy for Peru?
I guess there is an opportunity. As you mentioned, even though globalization had this message of let's move together towards a better world, more interconnected, where we have all the same benefits or better, or we be better off, we need to understand that not necessarily every single region or every single country was able to participate and have the same position on this process and the same opportunities. So the fact that countries such as Peru were able to join or embark into globalization also made the country very dependable on many ways. And for instance, the response we were giving was more as to this globalization dynamic was more like, okay, we are going to provide natural resources. We are going to provide these specific things. We are going to provide or just send food, but we were not necessarily working on developing our technology, working on or improving our regional response as Latin America. We were not working on the scientifics or research section. We were not working also or improving or the labor rights of our people. And when this kind of situation comes, then we have a different paradigm. We are so dependable that we are not able to get respirators for our doctors. We are so dependable that we don't have the dressing that they need, so we are so dependable that, for instance, our industry has stopped in so many ways. So I heard the General Secretariat of the Economic Commission for the Latin American and Caribbean region from ECLAC. This is like the regional commission of the UN, and she said something that calls my attention a lot. She said this deglobalization process is also an opportunity for regions such as the Latin American region to rework or reimagine a regional response, a regional interaction. Even though I love to be a global citizen, I also see that the inequality on this dynamic of globalization was not necessarily the best thing for every single person or every single country or actor. So definitely I see opportunities in a non globalized world as the one we had. I think globalization can, for instance, keep going, but with a different dynamic, with a dynamic where we have better opportunities, where we are able to do things.
And I want to shift to fear and anger. You're all quite optimistic, thank God. But let's talk about fear and anger, because there's a lot of both of those. The pandemic has made everybody afraid. How do we come out of this combination of anger and fear of the future? How does it change people?
I think that fear is such an innate response, and at the moment is not an unreasonable one, especially given that in most of the nations that we see, those who are in charge are not really making policies or decisions that are coherent or even useful or helpful. I know that there's a lot of confusion at the moment in the UK since the last press conference by Boris Johnson. No one quite knows what they're supposed to be doing. I know that the same feelings are reflected in the US. At the same time, I think on a smaller localized scale, I do see, at least anecdotally, what David was saying before, that there might be a lot of tension and stress over losing jobs. Everyone is now beginning to know someone who is either in the ICU or who has passed away from the virus. However, there is a sense of solidarity that bands around then smaller communities where you try to help each other, where you try to uplift each other. There are a lot of grassroots organizations in the UK that are helping elderly people, people in care homes, people who are disabled, have access to food, have access to necessities and utilities. The amount of volunteers that came out on the first night that the government called out for volunteers for the National Healthcare Service was really overwhelming. And then you see people who are actively making the effort to support local businesses that can still be open. And I think those two things are not necessarily contradictory. I think the only solution to fear is action. I think anger is born out of an inability to act when fear strikes. I think the idea that you feel useless and powerless, I think that's what leads to anger. I think taking action in even on a very small scale, being able to help, being able to feel like you have some minute control over some things is the way to move out of this. And I think that this is a great opportunity for people to really go back to grassroots actions, to understand how smaller communities can build up, share knowledge with each other, and then for that to become sort of a wider scale national or even global action. You talked about this sort of dichotomy between globalization and deglobalization. I think that globalization has happened on two fronts. I mean, one is very much the material, logistical, sense of trading, of supply chain, of manufacturing. But the other is, the more intangible stuff, the soft power, the globalization of culture, the globalization of ideas. I think that everyone who were in seats of power, who were policymakers, who were CEOs would say it's impossible to do this because, the world cannot continue if we did this, if we cut this down, if we put in those measures, if we signed up to these protocols. And now we've been forced into a situation where it has had to stop. And of course, we are, going into probably one of the deepest recessions that we've seen. However, I think we've also been able to see that the world can stop. So then it's a matter of where do we go from here? And I think the globalization of the intangible stuff is going to be the thing that lifts us out of this, the sharing of knowledge, of culture, of ideas, of grassroots movements, of being able to replicate things, having open source technology, all of that, and people being able to feel like they can take action, I think is what's going to lift us out of our fear and hopefully dissolve the anger over time.
The world has stopped. You can see the stars again. But you also have massive unemployment. You have rising hunger. You have clearly a lot of abuse under these lockdown situations. We can't live under lockdown. David, you're a doer. You live in a world of doing something different. What kinds of things, from an energy point of view, from a climate point of view, can you imagine getting done now that maybe weren't getting done before? Baiqu just said that anger activates and fear freezes. How do we activate in this environment?
I mean, I think we have a desire right now of the uncertainty of what's going on. I mean, we're facing huge debt. Corporate profits have never been as high, but then, wanting bailouts. I think at the end of the day, I'm a big promoter of entrepreneurial or environmental or sustainable entrepreneurship. And what that means is looking at the world around you and finding the gaps, finding the places that you say, hey, I think that I can solve that or I can fix that. And what I've done in my career is put a vessel around that or a business around it. And there's been a lot of opportunities that we haven't done anything with or attacked. But I think at the end of the day, if you look at it and you look at the places where there's needs assessment, and that could be in sustainability, energy efficiency, feeding people, being philanthropic. I think there's a lot of opportunity to come out of this. And quite honestly, I've seen an immense push, especially with what I do with Copia, but of philanthropic donations and people really taking this time in this place right now to help others. I mean, right now we have 33 million people that are out of work here in the United States. I mean, that's happening globally around the world. And what we're doing right now, donations and feeding people and getting the volunteer drivers, getting restaurants to turn back on, all those things are if you take what's actually negative happening in the world and look at what's really happening right now, I'm proud of it. I just think we need to take that energy and continue to keep driving. But when we come around the other side of this, let's educate people and get them driving towards green business, green development, and sustainable movements that we can do that. And I think that if government puts the right amount of cash or puts in the right places, around the world, we could see substantial changes.
Rosie, you are just finishing a degree and you have lots of friends who are in school, are about to leave school. How do people begin operating in this weird world that we've created for you?
That's very interesting, actually. In a world where, unemployment mostly on youths, it triplicates the adults' unemployment rate. So yeah, it's a preoccupation. Actually, I'm in that position right now, but I think it's it will be easier for some people than others, definitely. If there is some young people that were able to have a network of organizations or friends or people who, for instance, they were collaborating before and so on, it's most likely that there will be some options and there are some opportunities, but not necessarily for young students who are finishing school and suddenly they are in the pool with thousands of people who have lost their jobs and they want to get a job. So I think it's going to be a very challenging process. And the uncertainty puts a lot of pressure, a lot of stress on our shoulders, because young people is always being pushed to, you need to respond to the challenges, you need to, youths need to move forward and so on. Yes, but I have a lot of uncertainties right now. In some countries we don't even have like unemployment insurance, or we don't have even healthcare access. So I think those are valid points for us to think about. And definitely this crisis has shown us a clear radiography or x-ray of many social dynamics and global dynamics that were going on, but we were not able to see them as clear as we are now. And now that we are seeing that, for instance, our health system are so precarious and our labor market is so precarious and we have many things like are falling apart, is that, oh my God, these problems are not just because of COVID-19. We have generations and decades of inaction or wrong decisions being taken or wrong dynamics working that have put us in a position that right now we have all this feeling that everything is, it's, for instance, falling apart, and there is uncertainty on how we're going to get jobs, or I'm going to get a house, how, etc. So
arguably, not just the coronavirus, but leadership got us to where we are. And that's not a comment on any particular leader in any particular country. But I suspect you would all agree that we need different kind of leaders to get us somewhere else, somewhere better.
I think that first of all, we have to perhaps redefine the idea as well of what we mean by leadership. I think through this crisis and what Rosario is saying is very true, is that it's highlighted a lot of the inequalities that have existed for a long time and has been exacerbated, from domestic violence to poverty, access to healthcare, clean water, education, etc. So I think when we're thinking about leadership, we have to think about people who are not just the ones that are standing in front of our TV screens or who have, a million followers on Twitter or on Instagram. We have to look at people who are taking action because they are driven by a need to make things better now for the people who are in their communities. I think that, what David was saying about finding opportunity. And in that way, I see a lot of similarities between artists and entrepreneurs. I think you have to think creatively, and I think you have to see things from a different perspective and be able to translate that into action and then to mobilize and motivate people to join you in your vision. So for me, I think new kind of leadership is value-based, is action-driven, it's driven by things like compassion and innovation. And I think it also has to be cross-disciplinary. I think people who are creative in their thinking, but also open in their approach to collaborating with others. I think working in silos in the way that a lot of leaders have done in the past just doesn't work anymore. You have to be working across industries, you have to be sharing knowledge, you have to be collaborating, and you have to be working towards a common goal together.
Let me pull on that one word you just used, which is trust. Trust and leadership go together, or you don't have leadership, you certainly don't have action. How do you develop trust effectively in an organization?
Yeah, I think trust is something earned. I think that it starts with your people. I think it's educating your people. It's jumping in the trenches with them as a manager, as a leader, and it's showing them that you're willing to go to the ends of the earth for them. And I think that quintessentially is what makes a good leader. Now, I do agree with Baiqu, and I think that we spend too much time focusing on how many, someone who's famous because they have so many likes on Twitter or Instagram. I like to celebrate the scientists and those that are right now creating new and efficient ways to deal with waste or deal with electricity, or those innovators, those people that spend their day in a sort of unsexy way of just grinding it out and creating value. And so I think, to answer back to your question on trust, I think, yes, you not only have to, as a leader, be out there to teach your team, but also think out in the world of who you do business with, what you mean, what's your vision, what's your passion, what's your moral compass, and hold true to that. And I think in the world of working in the real world, where it's not always that easy to navigate, I think holding those truths to be what guides you, I think, is the way to develop trust with your teammates, your coworkers, and those you want to do business with.
Rosie, how do you think about leaders, and how do you think about the leaders that we have today?
Well, sometimes leadership is something that builds organically to, like, within your community, and that is being done by the work you do, and then people that start seeing that you are changing the world from actions, and then they start trying to follow that guide and also take action themselves. So I think that is one of the ways that we see leadership, and that is the way that we want to see leadership in the future. When people is not necessarily saying, "Oh, I trust in the system; they can do everything," because we have realized that sometimes systems have failures, and we need to be there. We need to be eager to do things. We need to be ready to take action in many different ways. Even though if it's a very small action, we have to be ready to just, and move from that observing or position to the doing position. So that one first. And then regarding to the leaders, definitely we see different kind of leaders. And the people that, for instance, we have appointed are not necessarily responding to the things that we aspire. So I think those kind of factors also influence on the decision-making process of the leaders or the people who are our decision makers. So in those terms, I think it's also important for us to think about engaging on the electoral processes. I mean, we have been in a position of thinking on this decision maker is not doing his job. Okay, but for instance, there is people that have the qualities to do it, And in my personal case, I was so afraid to do politics at the beginning because I never wanted that my job on the grassroots be related with any political party or with any, I didn't want people to think, oh, she's been doing that because she wanted to be elected for this. But at some point you realize that as civil actor, you are sometimes crashing against the wall. And you can do many things, but at some point there is that decision that needs to be taken by someone who is being elected to take that decision. And that is a breaking point for many of us millennials on thinking, for instance, to also aspire to be decision makers, you know, and try to be those people who have that ultimate decision, and instead of taking it in order to continue with a current dynamic that, for instance, is not working, change it and create a new dynamic that is going to respond better to the people's need and aspirations. And I also heard once, I guess this, I'm not very sure who said this, but it came into my mind all the time, that, for instance, the best leaders are the ones who are not desiring to be in that position, you know, because it's not a self-interest that take them there. Is their job or their passion for the things they are doing, you know?
I think one of the things that each of you in very different ways demonstrates is that you don't have to be elected to be a leader. Indeed, that most leaders aren't elected. And even, Rosie, to the point you just made, most people doing politics aren't politicians. And I think that's for the better, not for the worse. Let me thank all of you. Stay healthy, stay sane.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the New Thinking for a New World podcast. We welcome your comments, and please subscribe to other episodes in the podcast app of your choice. This podcast was made possible with the generous support of the Stavros Niarchos Foundation.